The Hegemony fleet that entered the Sol system was not a punitive expedition. It was barely even a fleet. 47 vessels, mostly frigates, 2 cruisers, 1 command ship, dispatched to establish dominance over a species that had, according to 9,000 years of xenobiological consensus, no business surviving contact with a Class 4 civilization. Admiral Veth Corps had done this before. You sent a small force. You demonstrated overwhelming superiority. The species capitulated or was reduced. Either outcome took at most a few weeks. She studied the readouts of the 3rd planet as her fleet made its approach. Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Single moon. 7 billion inhabitants spread across hundreds of nation-states, many of which were already at war with one another. Technologically primitive, barely spacefaring. Their weapons ran on chemical combustion, electromagnetic acceleration, crude, nuclear fission. Their fastest vehicles moved at a fraction of a percent of light speed. They had no shields, no directed energy weapons, no biological augmentation programs, no natural armor, no clothes, no venom. They were, by every measurable standard, unequipped for war against anything beyond themselves. Her tactical officer, Sesek, summarized the threat assessment in one word: negligible. The first orbital bombardment destroyed 3 industrial centers and a military command hub on the largest continent. Veth Corps watched the thermal blooms expand on the display and waited. This was always the moment a species understood what it was dealing with. The silence that followed a demonstration of real power. The quiet before the broadcast requesting terms. The humans launched a counterattack within 6 hours. Primitive kinetic missile. Electromagnetic rail slugs. A handful of nuclear warheads cobbled together from what remained of their arsenals. Everything shattered against the Hegemony's standard deflection grid without registering a single casualty. Veth Corps watched the detonations bloom harmlessly across her shields like light on water. They know our defenses are impenetrable, Sesek said, genuinely puzzled. They confirmed this empirically on the first volley. Yet they launched 4 more. Demonstrating resolve, Veth Corps said. It is a common primitive response. Broadcast the capitulation terms. The terms went out on every human frequency simultaneously. Cessation of resistance. Surrender of governing bodies. Reduction to client state status. Standard package. She had broadcast these same terms to 14 species before. 11 had accepted within 48 hours. 2 had required second demonstration. 1 had required a third, after which there was nothing left to accept terms. The humans did not respond. She gave them another 48 hours and destroyed 2 more cities. They launched more missiles. Veth Corps felt the first small prickle of something. She did not yet have a name. 4. She dismissed it. These were primitives. They simply had not yet processed the full weight of their situation. She would be patient and thorough, and eventually they would do what every species did when faced with the unavoidable mathematics of extinction. They would stop. By the end of the 3rd week, she had destroyed approximately 40% of their industrial capacity. Every military launch site on the primary continent had been reduced to glass. Their largest navies sat on the ocean floor. And yet, the counterattacks continued. Smaller now, more desperate but continuous. More than that, the humans had stopped fighting each other. Dozens of nation-states that had spent centuries in open conflict had gone quiet. Their communications, frequencies, once fractured into hundreds of competing channels, had collapsed into a single coordinated signal. They were talking to each other. They are unifying, Sesek said, and there was something new in his voice. Not fear. The Veth did not fear primitives, but something adjacent to it. Confusion slowly curdling into discomfort. It does not matter, Veth Corps said. A unified primitive is still a primitive. But she increased the bombardment anyway. The 4th week brought something that had never appeared in any of her pre-engagement briefings. The humans launched what her analysts eventually identified as improvised atmospheric craft. Not warships, but commercial. Transport ships, cargo haulers, even civilian aircraft, stripped down and loaded with whatever explosive material their operators had gathered in the preceding days. They flew them directly at her frigates on manual control. Not remotely. Piloted. Manually. With the pilots inside. Not one breached the deflection grid. Not one came close. But there were more the next day. And the day after that. Sesic pulled the communications intercepts and ran them through the translation matrix. He read the results in silence for a long time before bringing them to Beth Core. "What are they saying?" she asked. He took a moment. "They are asking for volunteers." "For the craft?" "Yes." And he set the data pad down carefully. "They have more volunteers than craft." Beth Core looked at the display for a long time without speaking. On the surface, below, her bombardment continued. Cities burned. Coastlines were reshaped. The thermal signatures of human industry blinked out one by one like dying embers. And still, from the rubble, the counterattacks came. Not effective. Not close to. Effective. But relentless. Grinding. Ceaseless. She had never needed to resupply mid-engagement before. She found herself doing the calculations now. Her fleet had been designed for short, decisive actions. 47 vessels, with ordnance loadouts calibrated for a standard 3-week subjugation. She was in her 6th week. Her frigates were drawing down their secondary munitions. 2 cruisers had begun rotating their weapons systems to let the primary arrays cool. Her crew, a species that had not lost a military engagement in 4,000 years, were beginning to show signs of something she had no protocol for. Fatigue was not the right word. It was something more like bewilderment, an erosion of the fundamental certainty that had always underpinned their operations. That certainty being this: all things, when pressed hard enough and long enough, eventually break. The humans were not breaking. She called Sesic to her command deck in the early hours of what the humans called morning, looked out at the planet turning slowly below, and said, "Pull me the casualty projections. Full theater. If we continue at current engagement tempo, what are the final numbers?" Sesic was quiet for a moment. "For them or for us?" "Both." He pulled the data. He read it. He set it down. "For them," he said, "at current trajectory, approximately 2 billion dead within the next 4 weeks. After that, industrial collapse, resource failure, civilizational regression to pre-industrial state, effective elimination as a spacefaring species. And for us." Another pause. "At current munitions expenditure rate, we exhaust primary ordnance in 11 days. We can maintain the deflection grid indefinitely, but we will be unable to continue offensive operations without resupply. Nearest Hegemony depot is 31 days at standard transit." She did the math without speaking. 11 days of offensive capability. 31 days to resupply. 42 days in which a species she had come to subjugate would continue throwing itself at her shields while she sat in orbit, unable to respond. And then she would return, and the humans who remained would still be there, still talking to each other, still building from rubble, still asking for volunteers. "What is the status of their industrial reconstruction?" she asked. Sesic almost didn't answer. "They have rebuilt approximately 12% of what we destroyed under active bombardment, while the attacks were ongoing." Beth Core turned from the viewport. She thought about the 14 species she had subjugated. Their silence after the first demonstration, the speed with which they had broadcast their surrender, the relief in their communications once terms were accepted. She thought about the fundamental logic of warfare as the Veth understood it. You apply force until the cost of resistance exceeds the cost of surrender. At that point, any rational species surrenders. It was mathematics. It was as close to a law of nature as military doctrine could come. She thought about the humans flying their cargo ships at her frigates with the pilot still inside. She thought about 2 billion dead and a species still asking for volunteers. She thought about rubble and reconstruction and a planet that had been burning for 6 weeks and was still, somehow, fighting back. And she understood, with a cold clarity, that she would spend the rest of her life trying to forget that the mathematics had not failed. The humans simply didn't care about the mathematics. They weren't fighting because they thought they could win. They had known from the first volley, from the first nuclear warhead that splashed harmlessly off her deflection grid, that they could not win. They were not fighting toward victory. They were not fighting toward anything. They were just fighting because that was what they did. Because something in the deep biological architecture of this small, fragile, unarmored species had been built over millions of years on a moderately hostile planet to simply never stop. Not to win, not even to survive. Just to never, ever stop. She could kill 2 billion of them. The rest would keep going. She could kill 4 billion. The rest would keep going. She could reduce the planet to slag and the humans. She was not ruling it out. Not anymore. Might find a way to reach her hull and keep going there too. She could not win this war. Not because she lacked the power to destroy them. She had the power. She could end this planet inside a week if she chose to spend the ordnance. She could not win because destroying them was not the same as defeating them. And for humans, she now understood, those were two entirely different things. You could not defeat them. You could only destroy them. And destroyed things did not make client states. Destroyed things did not mine resources or generate tribute or serve any of the 17 practical purposes that subjugation was supposed to serve. She had come here to conquer a planet. She was going to leave having learned something that would keep her awake for the rest of her life. Plot a withdrawal course, she said. Cesic turned to look at her. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I will file the report myself, she said. I will tell the council what we found here, and I will recommend, in the strongest possible terms, that we never come back. He looked at the planet one more time, at the fires still burning on the surface, at the tiny, furious signals still pinging off their deflection grid, at a species that had watched 2 billion of its own die and was still, even now, still asking for more volunteers. What do we classify them as in the report? He asked quietly. What threat? Tier. Vethkor considered the question for a long time. There is no tier for this, she said finally. Write a new one. They left the Sol system on the 43rd day of the engagement. They did not broadcast a ceasefire. They did not send a final message. They simply turned their ships and went. On the planet below, in the rubble of a dozen broken cities, in bunkers and basements and makeshift command posts hammered together from salvage, a species that had been burning for 6 weeks, watched the fleet disappear from there. Sensors. There was a long silence across every frequency. And then someone, somewhere, in a language the Hegemony's translators would have rendered simply as fierce, said, "They're gone. Get back to work."